microphone here.
Okay, welcome.
This is Rosalie and Jack, and we want to tell you all a little bit about our family history. I think we'll start maybe with Grandpa Rosner.
We have to
with the grandparents.
First, let's tell them what date it is today.
All right, today is April the 18th, 2009. And we're at the Cousins Club in St. Augustine. Okay, I think we'll talk about our grandparents first. The earliest thing I got on Grandpa Rosner, that was Fata. We used to call him Fata.
Fata.
And he came over to this country, according to the records that I got from Brett, when he was 30 years old, and it was in 1898. And I believe he came over and left his wife and Daddy.
Did he bring Sarah with him?
He might have brought his... Oh, got my phone. Let me see. Let me go back just a little.
You have to start over.
All right. Now, his daddy came over in Grandpa came over in 1898. He was about 30 years old. He was from Iași, Romania, and he left his wife there. And he was a baker. I think they ran a bakery shop, and you say they were well off?
They were well off because Dad used to tell me that his sister Sarah and Sarah and Jane got to learn many languages because they had a private tutor. Only he was too young, and he didn't get all the languages they did.
Okay, but Grandpa really he had money, so that's how they
came here.
He came to the United States. He left Grandma and Daddy in the old country.
And Jane.
And Eva?
No, Jane and Sarah came with him, and Eva came later with Daddy and Grandma.
Well, see, back in those days, they had pogroms.
Yeah.
And the Russians would come through with a wagon, and I think he had other siblings that were caught and thrown in the wagon and never saw them again. And I think they figured that was time to leave.
The only children that came were Sarah, who was the oldest, and Jane. And Max and Dad and Eva was the youngest, and she didn't. She died young.
She was younger than Daddy.
Yeah, she died in New York, and Grandma died because she had blood poisoning.
They didn't have antibiotics.
No.
So then Daddy, when he was a little boy, about 7 years old or so, tells me that he used to, on the Lower East Side, he used to sell Shabbos candles. That's one way they made a living. And when Daddy was about 12, 13, he came to Jacksonville by himself.
And he lived with cousins, Buchholz, and they had stores, and so he started working for them.
In the store. And I think Max was here. Max
was there?
Max was a professional boxer. And he died, I think he was about 26 years old when he died. He died of pneumonia after one of his fights.
Oh.
And he's buried in Jacksonville. He and Grandpa Rosner are both buried in the old Center Cemetery and along the plot with the Buchholz family, because that was Daddy's cousins. And
Grandma and Eva are buried in New York, because Sidney and I saw their graves.
They're buried in New York.
They're buried in New York, and they died probably 1910 or something.
Yeah. Well, then Daddy lived in Jacksonville, and he eventually went to work for E.T. Allen, who had a department store. And my mother, Annie, used to work there too. That's how they met. I think she was a cashier.
That's how they met.
And she only went. I don't think Daddy ever went to high school. I don't know how much schooling he really had, but he was a pretty smart man. And
Mother went to 8th grade.
She graduated 8th grade, but she had a mind like a computer. She could add up a column of numbers faster than you can with a little
She was
computer.
sharp.
She was very sharp. And she and Daddy were dating. And Grandpa Rosner was a very, what I remember, was a very nice-looking man. He had silver gray hair, curly hair, very pleasant, easygoing.
Beautiful blue eyes.
Beautiful blue eyes. And he lived with us in Gringo Springs.
That's right.
After Mother and Daddy were married. But he died in about 1932, I think. 32. He died before we left Gringo Springs. I remember, maybe 1930.
About that time, yeah.
And he lived with us.
Mm-hmm.
And what else was I going to say about it? Oh, Daddy and Mother, though, worked at E.T. Allen, and they were going to get married, and then World War I started, and Daddy went to volunteer for the Army. You know, everybody was volunteering, and he went there, and he was going to get they wanted to know if somebody had a good handwriting, because they didn't have typewriters. My daddy had a beautiful handwriting. So he right away, they said, we're going to take you, let's go to get you a physical real quick, and we'll swear you in, and you'll be the secretary, or whatever you call them, to write up the records.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. And so that's when Daddy went to take the physical and found out he couldn't see. He was nearsighted. He couldn't see across the street. He never knew it. So they didn't take him in the Army. So he never went in the Army.
Talk about his handwriting. He used to make sale signs in the store, and he actually was doing calligraphy and didn't know it.
That's right. He had a beautiful handwriting.
Yes.
And but anyway, what was I going to say about he and Grandma?
Well, then Mom got married in 1919.
Yeah, well, they couldn't get married because the war was on. And the minute the armistice came along in November of 1918, they all said, now we can get married. So they got married on Groundhog's Day, February the 2nd. 1919, they were married. Then, I guess it was soon after that, they moved to Gringo Springs.
I was a year old.
You were born in Jacksonville.
I was born in Jacksonville. I moved to Gringo when I was a year old.
Okay, well,
Dad went into his own store.
Yeah, he opened the Beehive Department Store.
That was the name.
Beehive Department Store. And he and Mother opened up the store, and I was born in Live Oak. And the reason I was born in Live Oak, because that's where Grandma Mendelson lived. And back in those days, you didn't go to the hospital. You went to Grandma's house to be born. So that's where I was born. And I guess he was in partnership with his sister and brother-in-law, Jacobs, Beryl Jacobs was his brother-in-law.
And they were in business. And they had a store in Stark. Beryl had a
I think they had about 10, 12 stores at one time.
No. They had 4 because Willie Darbro took care of one in Daytona. And there might have been one other. They had 4.
They had 4 stores. And then that was during the boom. And then all of a sudden it was the bust. So they were about to go bankrupt, go out of business, and so they agreed not to stock up their stores and just pay off their bills. Well, Daddy's Darbro's, who was Willie Darbro, was their son-in-law, and he said, we're not going to do that. We're going to stock up our stores, and Daddy got stuck with the bills. And
that was the end of the friendship. Yeah.
It was the end of the relationship.
They did us dirty.
And Daddy and his sister never talked again. And so that was the end of that. And then Daddy worked his way out of the Depression.
Yeah. And we moved
to Lake City when I was about 12 years old. So it must have been about 1935.
I was 13, so you had to be...
I was about...
11.
No.
I was 13.
Yeah, I was in the 7th grade. So if I was about 10, 11. 10, 11.
I was 13. I remember.
And we moved to Lake City, and Daddy opened up the National 5 and 10 cent store.
Right.
Because Uncle Louie was in the 10 cent store business in Live Oak, and Daddy went into that, and we were, made a living, but it was
a struggle.
It was tough, and
but we didn't know it.
No, we never like for anything.
No.
I mean, and what else happened then?
In Lake City, we had a house.
On 1017 East Duval
And
Street.
we had...
First we lived over there near the veterans.
The veterans. Yeah, that was a small house. Then we moved to our own house, and we had one bathroom with 3 doors.
That's right.
And 2 bedrooms, and then a sleeping porch.
And we all slept on the sleeping porch.
Jack and Shelley slept on the sleeping porch, and Marilyn and I shared a room, and Mother and Dad had a room, and we all of us shared the 3-door bathroom.
One bathroom.
Yeah, but we didn't.
No, we
were different. And we had a
space heater.
And we finally got a telephone, and it was a party line.
The number was 83J.
I don't remember that.
I don't remember the number.
And it didn't really cost that much, and it took us 5 years to talk the folks into getting a private line.
Well, that was in Jacksonville already.
No, we had a private line in Lake City finally.
But
it took us a long time.
Well, the only time the phone rang was when somebody died. That was the only time you.
Yeah, you didn't call anybody up on the phone. You really only.
And we didn't have a phone in the store, so you couldn't communicate with the store.
No.
Because I said when the phone rang, you knew somebody died.
Yeah, nobody called anybody.
No, we didn't use the phone that much. And what else? Anyway.
Well, we have to talk about the other family now. Grandpa. Mendelson married Grandma Mendelson in Brooklyn.
Her name was
Hotchkiss. And it brought her down at the turn of the century to Key West. And they lived there a very few days because she wouldn't stay there. They didn't have a kosher butcher. So they got on a boat, because that's how they traveled from New York to Florida. And Grandpa was the custom peddler. He used to go through the country peddling.
With a horse and wagon?
I think so. And he had all this, I don't know whether he peddled pencils or pots and pans or whatever. He didn't make much of a living. But they got back on the boat and moved up to Jacksonville because they had a kosher butcher there. And I think Grandpa was really a wanderer. He went, at one point in his life, I know he took my mother and he went to Texas to live. Houston. And I think Uncle Louis was born in Texas, wasn't he?
Was Uncle Louis younger than Mother?
No, he was older. It was first Uncle Louis, Aunt Bessie, Aunt Minnie, Mother, and Aunt Ruth.
That's right.
And I don't know who was born where, except Uncle Louis was born in Texas. Mother was born in New York. I think
Mother was
Grandma
born in New York.
Mendelson went back to New York to have Mother.
Yeah.
And then Grandpa, they lived in a lot of places, and they ended up finally, they one time came to Green Cove and lived. They had a little store there. And whatever they sold was what Grandma would sew on her sewing machine. And
you know a lot more about this than I do.
Finally, I think... Well, they ended up in Jacksonville, and they ended up having a piece of property there with 2 stories, a house where,
that's been a
duplex.
Panama Park.
In Springfield. No, Riverside.
All right, but they had property in Panama Park, too.
I didn't know about that. So anyway, they lived on the top floor, and they rented the bottom floor. Now, and they owned that. I don't know how they bought it. They bought it, and they ended up. Grandpa became Grandpa. They tell a story about Grandpa Mendelson going to. He used to go to Live Oak when they got older and spend a couple of weeks with Aunt Minnie and Uncle Sam, and we were all there. We always got together every Sunday, either in Lake City or Live Oak, having family dinner.
That's already later.
That's another story. But one time we were all there, all of us kids, and we loved to go play there with Lillian and Joel and Pearl, and we'd go in the backyard where they had a little house for the children to play in. And one day we were playing all around there, and all of a sudden we discovered some teeth under one of the bushes. And we didn't know it, but Grandpa had been looking for his teeth for 2 days. He didn't even know where he lost them.
I thought that was in Jacksonville.
No, it happened in Live Oak.
Okay.
It happened in Live Oak. But we were always family together for holidays.
We were like brothers and sisters.
Are we ready to talk about the holidays?
No, I think we'll talk more about Grandma and Grandpa Mendelson. But they lived on Post Street. I was upstairs on Post Street, remember? 2250. And
you went there to study Hebrew, didn't you?
Yeah. I was going to tell you something about Grandpa Rosner, more about him. Anyway, my mother took care of him. He lived with us. And I guess that's about all I was.
Yeah, that's not.
But I remember.
Yeah, we were quite young when he lived with us.
Yeah. And we used to live in Great Cove, and it was great. I used to go down on the river,
Mother didn't even know where we were. We were fishing on the pier.
On the river, and we used to go to these places where, as kids, we were just little kids, and God knows we could have fallen into the river. And we learned to swim when we were practically babies, because the pool was right. We used to go to the pool in the summer, and nobody ever watched
I learned to swim in White Springs when Uncle Louie, I was 2 years old. Uncle Louie threw me in the water and said, "Okay, baby, swim." And I could swim.
But that's just about the way I learned to swim. We were pretty good swimmers. We had to be. It was a matter of survival.
But in those days, Mother was in the store all the time, so she didn't even know where we were.
No, and I don't think she really worried. Not that she wasn't a caring, take care of her children. And that's what tells the story about Daddy and the Ku Klux Klan.
I don't know that story.
Oh, you know the story. But Daddy was in business in Lake City, in Green Cove Springs. He used to sell sheets to the Ku Klux Klan, and he was very active in the Rotary Club and in the Masons and the Eastern Star. They were big. Mother and Daddy were big in all the civic organizations. We were the only Jewish family in the entire place.
He was the Mason in the what was it? The Masons. He was the
Grandmaster,
and Mother was head of the Eastern Stars.
And we were the only Jewish family in entire Clay County. Mm-hmm. And so Daddy was in all the civic organizations, and he used to sell the Ku Klux Klan the sheets. And they came in one time to buy sheets and said, Bill, you ought to join the Klan. So Daddy told him no. He says, I can't join the Klan. So, well, why not? He says, because you have to swear allegiance to Jesus Christ, and I can't do that. And he said, oh, we'll leave that part out for you.
I didn't know that.
Oh, you didn't know that story? Oh, that's a great story. And so Daddy had the hardest time convincing him that he couldn't join the Klan. And whenever there was a jury and ever a trial in Great Cove Springs, Daddy was always on the jury, and he was always foreman of the jury. And,
I didn't know that.
And there was an old guy that got him for selling moonshine, and the poor old guy, the only way he could make a living was selling moonshine, and Daddy knew it. So they were just about, so they had the jug of moonshine as evidence, so they were ready to convict him. And so Daddy says, wait a minute. They say, Bill, they had the moonshine, and it was there, and he was guilty, and all this. And Daddy said, wait a minute. They said that was moonshine. They said, yeah. Did you smell it? And they said, no. Did they let you taste it? And they said, no. Well, how do you know it was moonshine? They said, well, I guess we didn't. So they acquitted him.
I didn't know that.
Oh, Daddy wanted to get him off because he knew the poor old guy couldn't make a living if he didn't sell moonshine.
I never knew that story.
I bet you did. And then later, when we lived in Lake City, Fred Cohn was running for governor. Fred P. Cohn. Remember? He was from Lake City.
I remember him.
He was probably the ugliest man I ever seen. But Daddy worked hard for him. Everybody painted their cars up, and I think the paint stayed on their car. And Daddy traveled around, and they were all politicking for Fred Cohn.
Did he win?
And Fred Cohn won. And so afterwards, Daddy went to him, and he knew that Daddy gave money and electioneered for him. Daddy didn't want anything for himself, but there was another poor old guy that needed a job, and he wanted to get the job as the bridge tender for the old Shands Bridge. And so he went to Fred Cohn and told him this poor old guy needed a job, and would he give him the job as a bridge tender. And so Fred Cohn says, well, he didn't tell him yes and didn't tell him no. But anyway, so he turned out and gave the job to somebody else. And Daddy got so mad that he says he was through. He would never politic for another another politician again.
He never got a favor.
One simple favor he asked, and he didn't get it, and he said, "I'm through with politics."
I never knew that.
So when we were in Lake City, Daddy was very civic-minded. He remembered the Elks, and he was the exalted ruler of the Elks. He ran the Elks Club in Lake City, and but he had a hidden agenda, because the Elks used to have a big Christmas party, and Daddy furnished all the toys. We had the toys and candy. He sold them all the toys and candy for the Christmas party.
I didn't know that either.
You didn't know that either?
Yeah.
And then Rosalie and I both graduated from Columbia High School, and Rosalie, the guy that was really hot for Rosalie, really wanted to date her, was the biggest anti-Semitic. Harvey Devane.
Oh.
They were the biggest anti-Semites in the Columbia County.
On their store, it said 100% Americans. They had a store down the end of the block. Yeah,
anyway,
I remember, yeah.
That's the story about Lake City. But we got along fine. We never had a problem.
Not in Lake City, but in Green Cove, I used to have trouble. The kids used to follow me and call me Jew baby. Yeah.
I was too little, I guess not.
Yeah.
But in Green Cove Springs, to go back a little bit, we used to, we were talking about the Gustavusons, Mama and Papa Gus. And they used to have a Ford agency, remember? It was across from the church. And next to it was the dairy. Yeah, they had a milk. She had about 3 or 4 cows at the time. She used to sell milk. It was a small dairy. And I don't know about you going there and getting milk. I used to take a little covered pail, the enamel blue pails. Yeah. And they used to, for Passover, only for Passover. They were like, enamel. And only for Passover, because Mother would buy their milk in the stores in a bottle. Milk came in a bottle. 5-cent deposit on the bottle. And what we had was Passover. I had to go and get the milk from Passover. It was probably raw milk. It was. It was so much better. We only had raw milk when we were little. No, we didn't have pasteurized milk. No, it was. And it wasn't homogenized either. The cream used to sell on top. It was good. But I used to go there, and I used to have to go through the turkey pen to get there. They had turkeys all around. All of that was in downtown. And chickens all. And then I think this was in downtown Lake Springs. About 20. Well, I'd say maybe it took them 10 or 15 years to become really a big dairy. They were the biggest in that part of the state. It took them a long time, but she used to just have a few cows and turkeys and chickens. It was just a very small. It was right in the middle of town. But they grew to be a major dairy. Yeah. It may still have their name on it. They may still. Oh yeah, still Gustavusons. And one of the sons. Oh, I tell you who else we used to see walking down the street in Coast was J.C. Penney. Yeah, he came. That's when Green Cove Springs really boomed, because he built Penney Farms. Yeah. And the old J.C. Penney, we used to see him walking down the street, and he had a son, Roswell. Yeah, I remember that. Roswell was a real playboy. I think he was married about 6 times or something. And he had a beautiful boat right there on the river, and he had a boathouse for it. And we used to go on the dock, the city dock, and used to get on his boat. He didn't know it. It was a beautiful boat. Anyway, so I was going to tell you a little bit about my boat. I think J.C. Penney's still there, isn't it? It's still Penney Farms. Penney Farms is still there. It was for retired Methodist ministers, I think. So it is for? And, but when I was time for my bar mitzvah, I came to Jacksonville, and for 6 months I lived with my grandparents, Grandma and Grandpa Mendelson, and I went to John Gorey Junior High, and I went to the Jewish Center, and they gave me special lessons for 6 months, so I become a bar mitzvah. And later, when Grandpa Mendelson died, remember that? And Grandma wouldn't, he died on Shabbos, and Grandma wouldn't let him move, wouldn't let him move. Yeah. And he was in a casket in the living room, and they kept putting ice there, and the smell and everything else. And I remember his skin was a dark gray. I remember lying. I don't remember that too much. I think I had nightmares from that. Anyway, that's beside the point. And then, but Grandma, I must have been about 14 or 15, and Grandma was getting a little, she had dementia or whatever, she had a stroke or something, and Jackie had to go and stay with her during the summer, and I think that was the worst time of my life. I used to stay there with Grandma.
I couldn't know.
Oh, yeah. I was the one that...
You were the only, just the two of you were there?
Just the two of us.
Did she cook and everything?
Sort of, and she cried the whole time, and...
I don't remember
it wasn't a very pleasant experience for me.
For one summer, huh?
Yeah, but anyway, when I went for my bar mitzvah, I got active. I was in the Boy Scouts.
Part of the problem was she wouldn't leave the house. They had trouble getting her to come to Mother's or to Aunt Minnie's.
She was. I would say she had Alzheimer's, but
she had the beginning of Alzheimer's because she turned on.
Everybody was stealing.
Yeah, and she turned on Daddy, and she really loved Daddy. And they say that's what happens in Alzheimer's. They turn on the person
at the time
that they love. Yeah, they called it. No, she was senile.
Anyway, so that's our story from...
Eventually, they tried to put her in a home in New York, and she got away from them and roamed the streets. So finally, they brought her back to Jacksonville, and they had somebody stay with her in the apartment, and they allowed her to have other patients. So it was like a mini rest home, and they took good care of her. Grandma, she was, I thought she was about 62 when she died, but I think I heard she was about 70.
But anyway, she was... But from the earliest time, I remember her. She wore her hair in a bun. She never wore makeup. She wore dresses that came down to her ankles.
Yeah.
She wore low-heel Oxford shoes. Yeah. She was old from the time when she must have been in her 50s, and she was already.
Maybe in her 40s she was old. We felt like she was
that's the way people were.
Yeah.
And I remember she had an old Victrola. Remember the Victrola?
Yeah.
And the old records that we used to love to play.
And remember the furniture itched so when you sat on it, it was some kind of horsehair.
Yeah, it was so hard.
Yeah.
And Grandpa used to make home brew.
Oh. All over the kitchen.
And we used to love to come there on Sunday, and there's always an experience because when he'd open a bottle, see where it would explode. And we used to have Sunday dinner there a lot of times. And Daddy and Uncle Louie and Aunt Bessie lived there.
In Jacksonville.
And Uncle Louie always wanted to take us.
But they lived in Springfield.
They lived in Springfield, and we used to love to go there. Mm-hmm. And we'd go for a ride with Uncle Louie, but Daddy stopped doing that because Uncle Louie never had new tires, and he was always getting flat tires, and he spent the whole afternoon changing tires and patching. Back in those days, you had inner tubes. They were always patching the inner tubes. They never bought new tires. And we used to love to come to Jacksonville and visit the Mendelsons, and we'd go to the Capitol Theater for the movies, and then once in a while we'd go up to downtown and go to the Florida Theater, where Jimmy Knight at the organ played.
I remember that. And I remember we used to go, our biggest place to shop was in the dime store there.
Oh, yeah, Cresses.
And then across the street was Jenks Restaurant.
Yeah.
We used to have
fried shrimp
there. I remember.
In fact, we used to come to Jacksonville for the holidays, and we all stayed at Grandma Mendelson.
No, we didn't. We didn't. We rented an apartment, my mother and Aunt Minnie together, and they would go 3 days ahead and cook.
I don't know.
And we all stayed, I'm telling you, we all stayed in one apartment. A couple of us would go to Grandma's because there wasn't room for everybody.
On the floor.
Yeah, there wasn't enough room for us in the apartment that they rented, so some of us children stayed at Grandma's house. And we used to sleep on that lounge, or that lunch, whatever they call that.
Well, I remember sleeping on the floor. I didn't know. And then after the services were, we used to go to Beagle's restaurant. And
Beagle's.
And they used to serve a real Jewish meal with heavy cholesterol, chicken.
But it was a good restaurant.
And you used to stuff yourself. And one yontif, Pearl and I decided that we didn't want that. So she said, come on, Jackie, and we'll go up to Jenks. And she and I went to Jenks, and we had fried shrimp.
You did that?
Yeah. And that was the second, I guess it was the first day, that all the women used to go shopping. After yeah. And that's what I remember about the holidays.
I just remembered it was wonderful because we'd go for the 3 days. We'd go a little ahead, maybe 2 days ahead, and then we'd go back for 2 days for Yom Kippur.
Yeah, Yom Kippur.
Yeah, and then after I got married to Sydney and moved to Bradley Beach, I found out that those were the only 3 days that we ever could take off from school. But then I found out there were a lot more holidays that the Jewish kids in Jacksonville didn't have to go to school. I mean, we didn't know about, but 3 days. We were really ignorant.
Anyway, what was I going to say? But with the holidays, we really had fun. And the synagogue didn't have air conditioning, and it was always in August and September, and it was so blazing hot.
We didn't get air conditioning until 1950 or 51, and when we wanted to cool off, we went to the movies. Or we went to Itch Chutney to swim.
Oh, well, that was just in general, but I'm talking about holidays, so everybody stood outside.
It was hot.
And it used to be fun because that's when all the girls and boys used to meet each other.
Well, that's why we went to synagogue to meet the kids. Yeah.
And we used to stand outside and in the park. And of course, nobody parked in front of the synagogue. Everybody parked about 3 blocks away.
Yeah.
Because you weren't supposed to ride. But meanwhile, everybody rode, but nobody.
Do you remember going to Jacksonville Beach for the summer?
Oh yeah.
With all the cousins. My mother never just went by herself. Aunt Minnie and her gang and then they used to invite Cooter and Rosalind and all the cousins came and they all
Dorothy Apartments,
and we stayed I think for a month with Mother, and then the next time the fathers came.
Yeah, no, we stayed for I think 2 weeks.
2 weeks, and then the next 2 weeks the men came and the women went back
to run the store.
The women went back to run the store, and a lot of times I got to stay with the men because they needed me to do errands, and I don't think I had to cook that much. The only thing, though, that was the one place that we were allowed to get shrimp and cook it in home.
Oh, yeah.
We all love shrimp. Because Daddy, years before that, used to have some man that brought him a boiled shrimp into the store, and he'd go in the back, and he would let me come in the back and taste them. And Mother didn't mind. I mean, he wasn't kosher, but Mother was strictly kosher.
Well, Daddy had a little charcoal pot outside. He used to cook steak on.
Yeah.
He had paper plate.
Mother didn't seem to mind.
One summer, we went to Daytona for a month. Remember, we went to Daytona Beach.
Yes, yes.
We stayed at Daytona.
Oh, I love Daytona.
And we had a nice apartment, and we were there for the summer. And we stayed there for.
But Aunt Minnie was there too.
Oh yeah. Oh, but Mother and Aunt was there. We didn't go anywhere in the summer, and then we went up to New York.
Oh.
We drove up to New York.
You were 5 and I was 7.
And Mother had to make me a little seat because I couldn't see the road, and that was before seatbelts. So she made from coffee cans. She made a seat.
She covered it,
and I sat on that seat so I could see the road.
And Aunt Minnie and Lillian went with us.
And I had a cowboy suit, and I was Tom Mix. And then they went shopping in one of the little areas in Brooklyn, and I'm standing outside, and they all went in the store, and I thought they left. So I didn't know, I was all by myself.
You were 5 years old.
So I walked back. I knew where Aunt Emma lived, and I walked back to Aunt Emma's house. And they had already notified the police that I was missing. And they were going crazy.
It was terrible that day.
They were going crazy looking for me, and I'm outside Aunt Emma's house. And finally Aunt Minnie found me. She said, "There he is." And I remember Aunt Emma said, "Well, don't tell the police because you'll have to tip them." So I guess the police in New York are still looking for me. But I got lost. They said I got lost, but I wasn't lost. I knew where I was.
I remember we had to stay in such terrible places. They didn't have decent places to stay in.
On the road and places to eat.
We'd stay in a place called a hotel, and we'd go up and get a room for all of us. One room would do for all of us because they had a couple of cots and stuff. And I remember the lights weren't even fixtures. They were just a light on a string that you pulled.
I don't remember.
Oh, they were terrible.
And then we went up to the mountains while we were there.
Oh, Daddy loved it.
And the springs were so clean and pure.
We went
the cousins
swimming.
couldn't get over. The New York cousins couldn't get over me because I caught a little minnow and the fish got away, and Aunt Thelma and them still laugh about me. I said, oh, shucks, I lost my fish. And they're laughing at my southern accent.
That's all they could talk about. Yeah.
Of course, Aunt Thelma and them was another
But I
story.
remember the kids had to eat in a separate dining room from the parents.
Yeah.
And I remember that's when my father learned to love blueberries. We never saw a blueberry until then.
Well, I remember being in the mountains, and I remember we ate by ourselves. We didn't eat with the parents, but that's about all I remember.
I don't remember too much. And I don't think we stayed there more than a week, or maybe 2.
Well, when your grandmother, or Grandma Ann, was a young girl living in Jacksonville, her good friend, one of the Diamonds, was dating, what was the
He
song?
was a songwriter.
Yeah,
I can't remember his name.
Oh, I can't think of it. Anyway, he was a pretty good songwriter.
She
met him during World War I when Camp Johnson was in Jacksonville. And then so she wanted to go up to visit him. And so a single girl couldn't go up there by herself. And I think Mother might have been married.
She was married for about a year then.
Yeah.
Or 6 months.
She sent her mother up there with her to chaperone.
Yeah.
So someplace in the picture's lost. He had a picture of Mother.
Marilyn's got that picture.
You think Marilyn's got it?
I think Marilyn got it. And they went up to the mountains.
Well, the mountain was a bunch of young
Yeah,
guys.
because he was working up in one of the...
Tin Pan Alley.
He was working up in one of the Catskills.
Tin Pan Alley, and the picture shows of Mother and
who was it?
Gershwin, George
Gershwin and Ira Gershwin. And right across Mother's lap is George Gershwin.
With his head in Mother's lap.
And for years, we saw that picture, didn't think anything of it. Then the friend whose wife died, and he came back to Jacksonville to visit many years later. She got to talking to him, and that's when we found out that it was George and Ira Gershwin. They had just gotten a job in the mountains, and they just started out with music. Very beginning of their careers.
Well, the story, how we really found out about that, was that I was over at Mother's house one day, and television was on, and it said that Ira Gershwin died. So Mother says, yeah, says he had a younger brother that died very young. I think he was a songwriter. That's how naive my mother was. I said, George Gershwin? She said, yeah. She had no idea who it was.
Can we turn that off? I don't know how to turn that off. I don't want to touch it. Turn it off.
Back in business now.
Dean, don't you think we ought to listen to see what we said and how it sounds? Can you? Let's be sure we're recording. You won't erase it, will you?
I don't.
What did you run out?